My uncle used my grandfather's dying wish to launch a new wine. He erased our family's name from the bottle, trademarked a new one, and told the world it was his story. He planned a massive launch party for press and influencers, a party designed to celebrate the death of our heritage. So I sent a gift. By the end of the night, his new brand was a laughingstock, and every major critic in the state was calling his wine a fraud. He didn't just lock me out of the party. He tried to lock me out of my own life. And I learned that sometimes the only way to honor a legacy is to be willing to burn it all down. It started, as these things often do, with a lie wrapped in the language of progress. "Hey, Lara, we have to modernize," my Uncle Marcus said, his voice smooth as polished marble. He was standing in the middle of our tasting room, a space my grandfather, Nonno, had built with his own hands from reclaimed barnwood. The air in that room always smelled of old oak, damp earth, and the faint, sweet ghost of 1,000 spilled glasses of wine. For Marcus, it probably just smelled like missed revenue. He was wearing a suit that cost more than our quarterly barrel budget, his slick city shoes looking ridiculously out of place on the worn floorboards. I was standing behind the wine-stained counter, my hands covered in a light dusting of dirt from the vineyards. I lived in that dirt. Marcus just wanted to pave over it. He was holding a PowerPoint presentation on an iPad, filled with pie charts and growth projections and words like synergy and brand activation. I just stared at the slide he had up. It was a mock-up of a new bottle. It was sleek, minimalist, and completely soulless. The label was a stark white with a single, aggressive black line cutting through it. The name at the top read Apex, not Serafina Grove, the name my nonna gave the vineyard a century ago. Just Apex, like a protein bar or a predatory lending company. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. "This," he said, puffing out his chest, "is the future. Project Atlas. We're targeting a new demographic. Millennials, Gen Z. They don't want history, Lara. They want a lifestyle brand. They want something clean, Instagrammable." I looked from the iPad to the wall behind him, where a faded photograph of my grandparents hung. Nonno, his face weathered and kind. His arm around Nonna Serafina, both of them beaming, holding up a cluster of deep purple grapes like it was a newborn baby. They had poured their lives into this soil. They didn't build a lifestyle brand. They built a life. Their story was in every bottle we produced. The Serafina Grove Reserve was named for my grandmother. The old vine Zinfandel came from the same gnarled 100-year-old vines my great-grandfather planted when he first arrived from Italy, with nothing but $2 and a pocketful of dreams. "You're taking our name off the bottle," I said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. He sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the foolish sentimentality of others. "We're not taking it off. We're pivoting. Serafina Grove will become our heritage line. Small batch, high price point for the connoisseurs. Apex will be our volume driver. It's a different blend, more accessible, quicker to produce." Accessible and quicker were his code words for cheap and characterless. I knew exactly what he was planning. He'd been talking about it for months, complaining that our aging process was too long, our yield too low. He wanted to use younger grapes, less expensive barrels, and cut the fermentation time in half. He wanted to make wine-flavored water and slap a trendy label on it. He wanted to strip mine our legacy for a quick buck. "Nonno would hate this," I said, the words catching in my throat. "You know he would. He said the wine was the story. What story is this telling?" "It's telling a story of success, Elara," he snapped, his corporate patience finally wearing thin. "It's telling the story of a family business that adapted and thrived instead of turning into a quaint little museum. My father was a brilliant winemaker, but he wasn't a businessman. I am." The condescension in his voice was a physical thing. He had inherited 51% of the vineyard when Nonno passed 2 years ago. I had inherited 49%, along with the title of head winemaker and the crushing weight of my grandfather's final wish. Marcos lived in a penthouse 3 hours away and visited twice a year to look at spreadsheets. I lived in the small cottage behind the main house, my hands stained with tannins, my boots perpetually caked in mud. I knew every vine on our 200 acres by name. He only knew their value on a balance sheet. For 2 years, we'd been locked in this Cold War. Me, fighting to protect the soul of the place. Him, fighting to sell it. It looked like he was about to win. The launch party for Apex, he informed me, was in 6 weeks. It was going to be a massive affair. Journalists, sommeliers, influencers, distributors. The works. He had already paid a PR firm a disgusting amount of money to orchestrate the whole thing. "You'll have a role, of course," he said, as if bestowing a great honor. "You can speak about the technical aspects of the vineyard, the terroir, people like that stuff. He wanted me to stand on a stage and be his prop. The authentic, dirt-under-the-fingernails winemaker, giving his cheap, commercial product a veneer of credibility. He wanted me to use my grandfather's memory to help him sell a lie." I just looked at him, my heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I just nodded, a slow, hollow movement. He took it as acceptance, smiled his satisfied, predatory smile, and left the tasting room, leaving the smell of his expensive cologne to fight with the honest scent of the wine. I stayed there for an hour, just staring at the picture of my grandparents, feeling like I was failing them with every breath I took. The conflict wasn't just brewing anymore. He had declared war, and he thought I had already surrendered. The weeks leading up to the launch were a special kind of hell. Marcos was never there, but his presence was everywhere. Emails with curt directives would arrive at all hours. Contractors swarmed the property, erecting a massive, sterile white event tent on the grand lawn. The one place Nonno insisted should always be left open for the community Easter egg hunt. They trampled the wildflowers Nonna had planted along the path. A branding team, all young, impossibly cool people in fashionable sneakers, walked around taking photos, calling our ancient oak trees great content backdrops. They talked about the vineyard like it was a movie set they had rented for the day. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home. My daily routine, the one that had always grounded me, now felt like a prelude to a funeral. I'd walk the rows of vines in the early morning mist, touching the leaves, checking the nascent grape clusters. This was my sanctuary. This was where I felt Nonno's presence most strongly. But now, even here, I could hear the distant beep of a forklift or the shout of a workman. The peace was gone, replaced by a thrumming anxiety. Marcus wanted me to create the tasting notes for Apex. He sent me a case of the final blend. I opened a bottle in the cellar, the one place the branding team was too scared to enter. It was cool and quiet down there, the air thick with the smell of aging wine and damp stone. It was my last refuge. I poured the wine. The color was pale, anemic. It smelled faintly of unripe fruit and chemicals. I took a sip and nearly choked. It was thin, acidic, with a cloying sweetness on the back end that tasted artificial. It was everything wine shouldn't be. It was an insult. I poured the entire glass down the drain, and the bottle after it. I couldn't bear to have it in the cellar, tainting the air. Later that day I was in the office, trying to ignore the mountain of invoices for things I never approved. LED uplighting, a celebrity DJ, custom-branded ice sculptures, when a young woman from the PR firm bounced in. Her name was Chloe, or Cleo, or something equally breezy. "Elara, hi," she chirped, holding up a glossy brochure. "Just wanted to get your sign-off on the press kit copy. It's super compelling." I took it from her. The cover had the stark Apex logo. Inside, under the heading "A New Legacy," was a story. It was a beautifully written, completely fictional account of a visionary son, Marcus, who took his family's charming but outdated vineyard and through his bold modern approach created a wine for a new generation. It painted him as the hero, the innovator. It mentioned his father, my grandfather, in a single sentence, referring to him as a traditionalist who laid the groundwork. It was the corporate equivalent of patting a dead man on the head. My name wasn't in it. Nonna Serafina's name wasn't in it. A century of struggle, of passion, of life, had been reduced to groundwork for my uncle's ego trip. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Where did you get this story?" I asked, my voice tight. "Oh, from Marcus," she said brightly. "He gave us all the key talking points. He has such a clear vision for the brand narrative. It's so inspiring, isn't it?" I just stared at her, the brochure trembling in my hand. This was it. This was the moment of absolute betrayal. It wasn't just that he was launching a bad wine. It wasn't just that he was sidelining me. He was actively, methodically, and publicly erasing us. He was stealing my grandfather's story, our story, and rewriting it with himself as the protagonist. He wasn't just building a new brand. He was demolishing the old one. He didn't just want me to be a prop at his party. He wanted me to witness the public unveiling of our family's obituary. He expected me to stand there and smile while he read the eulogy. "There's a mistake," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Chloe's smile faltered. "Oh, a typo? I can fix that right away." "No," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "The whole thing is a mistake." I dropped the brochure on the desk, stood up, and walked out. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from the smiling, cheerful executioners in my office. I walked past the soulless white tent, past the trampled wildflowers, and into the oldest part of the vineyard, to the block of Zinfandel vines that were as gnarled and twisted as arthritic hands. I sank to my knees, the rich, dark soil cool against my skin, and for the first time since Nonno died, I let myself cry. I cried out of anger, out of grief, out of a profound sense of helplessness. He was going to get away with it. He owned the majority. He had the money, the power, the PR firm. What did I have? Dirt under my fingernails, and a ghost for a grandfather. I stayed there until the sun began to set, the sky turning the color of a bruised plum. And as the cool evening air settled over the vineyard, the grief began to burn away, leaving something else in its place. Something hard and cold and clear, an idea. If he wanted to tell a story, fine. I would tell one too. But my story would be the truth, and I would serve it to his guests in a glass. I walked back to the house under the cover of darkness, not to the little cottage I lived in, but to the main house, which had been Nonno's. Marcus had locked up most of it, but I still had a key. I let myself in. The air was stale, the furniture covered in white sheets like rows of sleeping ghosts. I went straight to his study, a room I hadn't entered since he died. I ran my hand along his old leather chair, his desk, the bookshelves crammed with texts on viticulture, soil science, and Italian poetry. And there, on the bottom shelf, was what I was looking for. A set of thick, leather-bound journals. His winemaking logs. I took the one from his final decade and carried it, like a sacred text, back to the cellar. I sat on an overturned barrel, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows, and I opened it. His familiar spidery handwriting filled the page. He didn't just record data. He wrote about the weather, the mood of the vines, a joke the farmhands told him. And then I found it. His notes on a special, private blend he had been perfecting for years. He called it Il segreto di Serafina, Serafina's secret. It was a wine he made only for the family, for special occasions. It used grapes from 3 specific, ancient vines that he called the Sisters. It required a painstaking, slow fermentation process and aging in his oldest, most precious Hungarian oak barrels. It was the purest expression of Serafina Grove. It was his masterpiece. And in the margins, he'd written a note to me. Elara, mia cara. This one is our soul. Don't ever let them rush it. The soul needs time. Reading those words in that place felt like he was right there with me, his hand on my shoulder. And in that moment, my plan crystallized. I wasn't going to protest. I wasn't going to write an angry email. I was going to fight him with the one thing he couldn't replicate. Authenticity. I was going to make Nonno's wine. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the compliant, defeated winemaker. I answered the PR team's questions with monosyllabic grunts. I nodded during conference calls with Marcus. I let them think I had accepted my fate. But by night, I was a saboteur, a ghost in the machine. I became a creature of the dark. After the contractors and the event staff left each day, I would go out into the vineyard with a headlamp and a basket. I harvested the grapes from the Sisters by hand, one perfect cluster at a time, just as Nonno had taught me. I crushed them myself in the old, hand-cranked press he kept in the back of the cellar. It was brutal, exhausting work. My back ached. My hands were raw, but with every turn of the crank, I felt a flicker of my fighting spirit returning. I found the specific Hungarian oak barrels, hidden behind a false wall in the cellar, that only Nonno and I knew about. They were small, precious, and smelled of vanilla, spice, and history. I began the fermentation, following his notes to the letter. Every day I checked the temperature, the sugar levels, the slow, magical transformation taking place in the dark. I was moving on pure adrenaline and rage. This wine became my obsession, my secret weapon. It was more than just fermented grape juice. It was a bottle of truth. It was my grandfather's legacy, distilled and weaponized. I needed an accomplice. I couldn't get the wine to the guests on my own. I thought of Javier, our cellar master. He had worked alongside my grandfather for 40 years. He was a quiet, stoic man who had mourned Nonno's death as deeply as I had. He despised Marcos and everything he stood for, but he had a family to support, so he kept his head down and did his job. One night I found him in the cellar, polishing glasses for the party. "Javier," I said, my heart pounding. "I need to show you something." I led him to the hidden nook where the barrels of Il Segreto were aging. I siphoned a small amount into a glass and handed it to him. He held it up to the light, swirled it, and inhaled deeply. His eyes, which were usually cloudy with a quiet sadness, widened. He took a sip. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was silent. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. "It is the old man's soul," he whispered in Spanish. "It is his ghost in a glass." "Marcus is planning to sell a lie," I said. "I want to serve them the truth, but I need your help." I laid out my plan. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he looked at me, then at the barrel, and then back at me. He simply nodded. "For him," he said, gesturing to the cellar around us, a clear reference to Nonno. "For him, anything." The final piece of the puzzle was the presentation. I found a box of old, elegant bottles Nonno had saved, with beautiful, simple labels he'd had printed years ago. They just said, "Serafina Grove, Private Cellar Selection." I spent an entire night filling and corking exactly 50 bottles. Then I sat down and wrote a note. It was short, simple, and from the heart. It told the story of the wine, of my grandfather's dying wish, of the grapes from the sisters. It didn't mention Marcus by name. It didn't have to. It simply ended with the words, "Some things are worth more than their market value. This wine is the story of a family. We hope you enjoy this taste of our true legacy." I printed 50 copies on beautiful, thick cardstock, rolled each one into a tiny scroll, and tied it to the neck of a bottle with a piece of twine. My gift was ready. Nonno always said you can't know a vine until you know its history. He wasn't just talking about the plant. He was talking about people. To understand why I was about to risk everything, you have to understand the soil I came from. My childhood wasn't spent at playgrounds. It was spent in the vineyard. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, I was learning to tell the difference between Merlot and Cabernet leaves. Nonno was my teacher. He'd sit me on his knee on the old porch swing, a glass of his wine in one hand, and tell me stories. He said that every row of vines had a personality. The Petite Syrah were moody teenagers, all dark fruit and tannins. The Chardonnay were elegant old ladies, buttery and complex. He taught me that winemaking wasn't a science. It was a conversation. "You listen to the grapes, Elara," he'd say, holding a sun-warmed cluster in his palm. "They tell you what they need. Sun, water, time. You don't command them. You partner with them." He was a philosopher in overalls, a poet with dirt under his nails. Marcus was never part of this. He was Nonno's youngest son, the late-in-life surprise. By the time Marcus was a teenager, my father, Nonno's eldest, had already taken his place in the vineyard. Marcus saw it not as a legacy to inherit, but as a small-town trap to escape. He was smart, ambitious, and deeply embarrassed by his family's dirt-caked existence. He couldn't wait to leave for college, for the city, for a life that came in a glossy box. I remember one summer when he came home from business school. He walked through the vineyard in crisp white sneakers, wrinkling his nose at the smell of fermenting grapes. "You know," he said to Nonno, "with proper branding and a streamlined production model, you could triple your output." Nonno just laughed his big, booming laugh. "And why would I do that, son? So I can make 3 times the wine with 1/3 of the soul." Marcus didn't get the joke. He just saw a failed business opportunity. When my father died in a car accident, everything shifted. I was 18, just starting my enology degree. I came home and stepped into my father's role. It was what I was born to do. Marcus stayed in the city, building his finance career. He'd call Nonno every few months. The conversations always stilted, always ending with Marcus offering some unsolicited advice on how to leverage the asset. When Nonno got sick, it was me who took care of him. I drove him to his appointments. I sat with him through the long, painful nights. I read him Italian poetry when his eyes got too weak. Marcus visited twice. He stayed for an hour each time, looked uncomfortable, and talked about hospital billing codes. On one of his last good days, Nonno pulled me close. His hand, once so strong, was frail in mine. "Elara," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Promise me, this place, it's our story. It's the story of Serafina. It's your story. Don't let them turn it into just inventory. The soul needs time. Promise me you'll give it time." I promised. It was the most sacred vow I've ever made. When he passed, the will was read. I got 49% and control over the winemaking. Marcus got 51% and control over the business. Nonno, in his infinite wisdom, had tried to force a partnership, hoping it would bring his son home, hoping I could temper his ambition with tradition. He had underestimated the depth of my uncle's greed and overestimated the strength of our family bond. For Marcus, the vineyard wasn't a home to return to. It was a distressed asset to be flipped. My promise to my grandfather was just a line item he needed to erase. He didn't understand that for me, it was everything. He saw my loyalty to our heritage as a weakness. He was about to find out it was my greatest strength. The day of the launch party was a perfect, crisp autumn evening. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a golden light settled over the valley. It was the kind of evening Nonno would have loved. Instead, his lawn was covered in a monument to everything he despised. The white tent glowed from within, a sterile beacon of corporate hubris. A valet service was parking luxury cars in the lower field. The thumping bass of the DJ's music was a profane heartbeat, echoing through the sacred silence of the vines. I was supposed to be on stage in an hour. I stood in my cottage, looking at the dress Marcus's assistant had sent over. It was a sleek, black, joyless sheath. A mourning dress. I put it on. I felt like an actress playing a part I didn't audition for. 20 minutes before the event started, I met Javier by the cellar door. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He had the 50 bottles of Il Segreto packed carefully into unmarked catering crates. He was in charge of stocking the exclusive VIP tasting bar inside the tent. It was a stroke of genius from the PR firm, a way to make the most important guests feel special. They had no idea how special it was about to get. Javier wheeled the crates away, his face a mask of calm professionalism. I watched him go, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was no turning back now. I walked towards the tent, the manicured grass soft under my heels. As I got closer, I saw him. Marcus. He was standing at the entrance, greeting guests like a king welcoming subjects to his court. He was incandescently happy. He was shaking hands with a famous wine blogger, laughing with a top distributor. He was the man of the hour, the visionary, the hero of the story he'd invented. He saw me approaching, and his smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, Elara. There you are. You look appropriate. Remember, stick to the script. Terroir, soil composition. Keep it folksy. They'll eat it up." He patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a brand being seared into my flesh. I just nodded and walked past him into the belly of the beast. The tent was buzzing. Waiters circulated with trays of Apex. I saw people take a sip, their faces registering a flicker of confusion, then settling into polite neutrality. No one was spitting it out, but no one was swooning either. It was forgettable. In the corner, I saw Javier setting up the VIP bar. He placed the regular bottles of Apex Reserve on the main counter. Then, discreetly, he began uncorking the bottles of Il Segreto and placing them on a small separate table behind him, each with its little scroll tied to the neck. My turn on stage came. I walked up to the podium, the lights hot and blinding. I could see hundreds of faces looking up at me, their features indistinct in the glare. Marcus stood just off stage, giving me a tight, encouraging nod. I looked down at the approved speech on the teleprompter, filled with corporate jargon and empty phrases. I took a breath, and then I looked past the lights, towards the back of the tent, where I could just make out the silhouette of Javier pouring a glass of dark, rich, ruby red wine for a woman I recognized as the lead critic for Wine Spectator. I pushed the teleprompter speech aside. "Good evening," I began, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. "My name is Elara Serafina, and this is my home." I didn't talk about terroir in scientific terms. I talked about my grandfather. I told them about him teaching me to taste the rain in the grapes. I told them about my grandmother, Serafina, and how she believed the vines had souls. I didn't mention Apex once. I spoke for 5 minutes, telling the real story of the vineyard, the story Marcus had tried to erase. When I finished, there was a moment of confused silence, then scattered polite applause. I had fulfilled my duty, but not in the way he wanted. As I walked off stage, Marcus grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. His face was a thundercloud. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice a low snarl. "That was not the script. You were supposed to be selling our new brand, not giving a history lesson." "I was telling the truth," I said, pulling my arm away. "You should try it sometime." "The truth doesn't pay the bills, you sentimental fool," he shot back. "You're a child playing in a museum. I'm building an empire." "You're building it on a foundation of lies," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. "You put your name on a product that spits on everything he stood for. You stole his story. You erased his name. You erased our name. And you have the audacity to call it an empire? It's not an empire, Marcus. It's a counterfeit." Before he could respond, a man in a sharp suit, one of the PR handlers, rushed over, his face pale with panic. "Marcus, we have a problem." He was pointing towards the VIP bar. A crowd was gathering. People weren't talking. They were tasting, and their faces were anything but neutral. They were alive with shock, with delight, with revelation. The wine spectator critic was holding a glass of Il Segreto up to the light, a look of profound concentration on her face. She took another sip, then turned to her companion and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Now, this is a Serafina wine." Marcus's face went from rage to confusion to dawning horror. He pushed past me and strode toward the bar. He saw the bottles, the old labels, the scrolls. He snatched one up and unrolled it. I watched as his eyes scanned the words I had written. The color drained from his face. He looked up and met my gaze across the crowded tent. In that moment, he knew. He knew he hadn't just been outmaneuvered. He had been exposed. The quiet, sentimental fool had just set fire to his empire. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, cascading collapse. It was death by 1,000 whispers. The word spread through the tent like a contagion. People would get a glass of Il Segreto, read the note, take a sip, and their entire demeanor would change. They'd look at the glass of Apex they'd been holding with disdain, as if they'd just discovered it was poison. They'd find a friend, murmur something, and lead them to Javier's bar. It became the party's secret, illicit center. The DJ's thumping bass suddenly felt absurdly out of place against the growing hum of intense, serious conversation. Marcus tried to shut it down. He marched over to Javier and ordered him to stop pouring. "Take this garbage away, now," he commanded, his voice trembling with fury. Javier, my quiet, stoic hero, simply looked at him and said, in his calm, steady voice, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm serving the family's private selection. By request of the family." He gestured with his head towards me. It was a declaration of allegiance. Several prominent guests overheard the exchange, their eyebrows raising in unison. The PR firm's damage control was frantic and useless. They tried to distract people with a sudden, desperate announcement about the ice sculpture. Nobody cared. The first to leave was the critic from Wine Spectator. She walked right up to me, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She didn't smile. "Thank you for the story," she said, holding up the small scroll. "It's the best one I've heard all year. I look forward to writing about it." Then she turned and walked out, leaving a trail of silence in her wake. After that, it was a slow but steady exodus. Distributors who had been on the fence about carrying Apex suddenly looked very decided. Influencers who had been taking selfies with the logo were now huddled in corners, furiously typing on their phones. I could almost see the headlines being written. "Serafina Scion sabotages uncle's launch." Or worse, "The Tale of Two Wines, a legacy betrayed." By 10 p.m., the tent was half empty. The abandoned glasses of pale, pathetic Apex littered every surface. The untouched canapes were wilting under the heat of the lights. The grand party had curdled. It felt like the scene of a crime. Marcus finally cornered me by the entrance to the cellar. He looked like a man who had been physically assaulted. His perfect suit was rumpled, his face was ashen, and his eyes were filled with a venomous hatred that chilled me to the bone. "You ruined me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I hope you're happy, you and your precious dead grandfather. You've destroyed this company. Our legacy is worthless now." "No," I said, finding the strange calm in the eye of the storm he had created. "Our legacy was never the company, Marcus. It was the wine. It was the story. You thought the legacy was something you could own, something you could put a price on and sell. But it's not. It's something you have to earn. And you didn't just fail to earn it. You tried to kill it. I didn't destroy anything tonight. I just reminded people what our legacy actually tastes like." He had no response. He just stared at me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked small, defeated, stripped of his PowerPoint presentations and his brand narrative. He was just a man who had been caught telling a lie. The future of the vineyard was a huge, terrifying question mark. We were likely facing lawsuits from distributors, a PR nightmare, and financial ruin. But in that moment, standing in the cool, dark doorway of the cellar, the smell of real wine in the air, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had kept my promise. The soul of Serafina Grove was safe. For now. In the quiet, stark light of the next morning, the true cost of my rebellion began to sink in. The pristine white tent on the lawn looked like a deflated lung, a sad monument to the failed party. My phone, which I had turned off, was a minefield of notifications. Voicemails from furious distributors. Texts from distant relatives demanding to know what happened. And over a dozen missed calls from Marcus. I ignored them all. The story broke online before noon. The Wine Spectator article was titled, "The Ghost in the Machine: How a Daughter's Secret Wine Exposed a Brand's Hollow Soul." It was devastating. It didn't paint me as a hero or him as a villain. It just laid out the facts. The soulless apex, the sublime il segreto, the stolen story, the dying wish. It was journalism at its most surgical. Other blogs and industry magazines followed suit. An influencer who had been at the party posted a video comparing the two wines. She sipped the apex and grimaced. "Tastes like marketing." Then she sipped my wine, her eyes closing in bliss. "Tastes like love." The video went viral. The Apex brand was not just dead. It was a cautionary tale, a meme. Marcos's empire had crumbled into digital dust overnight. He finally got through to me that afternoon. "I don't know why," I answered. "Morbid curiosity, maybe." "You've bankrupted us," he screamed, his voice raw. "The distributors have pulled out. The investors are calling for my head. The bank is threatening to call in our loans. This is all your fault." "My fault?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're the one who bet the entire farm on a lie. You're the one who thought you could build a brand on nothing but air and arrogance. Don't you dare blame me for the consequences of your own greed. You're a self-righteous little martyr," he spat. "You'd rather see this whole place burn to the ground than see me succeed." "I'd rather see it burn with integrity than thrive on a lie," I retorted, and I hung up. The weeks that followed were a tense, uncertain limbo. The vineyard was quiet. The harvest was over, but the future was unwritten. We were hemorrhaging money. The weight of it all was crushing. I would walk the rows of vines, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves, and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. Had I saved the vineyard's soul, only to kill its body? One evening, Javier found me staring out at the valley, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. He was a gambler, The old man. Javier said softly, standing beside me. He bet on the weather, he bet on the soil. He bet on you. He looked at me, his dark eyes kind. You did not let him down. His words were a small balm on a very raw wound. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the good one, the responsible one, the peacemaker who held the family together. I was the one who smoothed things over, who swallowed my own feelings to keep the machinery running. That night at the party, I had finally broken character. I had chosen truth over peace. And I was learning that truth has a cost. It's not a gentle, healing light. It's a fire. It burns away the lies, but it can also burn down the house. I had to wonder if I was just a pyromaniac who had mistaken her matches for a moral compass. This experience taught me a lesson that was hard to swallow, like a young tannic wine. Authenticity isn't a passive state of being. It's an active choice, and sometimes it's a fight. My grandfather's legacy wasn't a precious, fragile thing to be kept under glass. It was a living, breathing entity that had to be defended, even from the people who shared its name. I learned that family isn't an automatic sanctuary. Sometimes it's the place you're most in danger of losing yourself. Marcus and I shared blood, but we didn't share values. And when values clash, blood isn't thick enough to bridge the gap. I had to let go of the idea that my job was to keep everyone comfortable. My job, the one I had promised my grandfather I would do, was to protect the story. And stories are messy. They have conflict and villains and moments of crisis. You can't have a beautiful story without being willing to endure the ugly parts. I stopped seeing myself as a saboteur and started seeing myself as a storyteller. I just chose a different medium than my uncle. He chose a press release. I chose a bottle of wine. It turns out my story was better. So here I am now, in the aftermath. The vineyard is in trouble, that much is true. But something unexpected has started to happen. We've been getting emails, not from distributors, but from small, independent wine shops, from high-end restaurants, from collectors. They've all read the articles. They don't want Apex. They want Il segreto di Serafina. They want the real story. We can't possibly meet the demand. We only have what's left of the 50 bottles and the few barrels aging in the cellar. But it's a start. It's a glimmer of a different kind of future. One built not on volume and speed, but on scarcity and soul. I am left with this profound question that sits with me every evening as I watch the sun set over the vines. I risked my family's financial security, my relationship with my uncle, and the stability of the only home I've ever known. I acted out of love and rage, and I can't tell where one ended and the other began. I protected a legacy, but I might have destroyed a business in the process. So, I have to ask you, the person listening to my story, when it comes to protecting what you love, be it a family, a value, a piece of your own soul, how far is too far? Did I do the right thing? Or did my love for the past blind me to the needs of the future? I genuinely want to know what you think. Please, leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking the truth? Your stories give me strength. And if you found a piece of your own story in mine, please consider subscribing. There's a lot more work to be done here at Serafina Grove, and I have a feeling the next chapter is just beginning.